Life is too short to work at a crappy company. That's why Software Engineering Daily is proud to be sponsored by Hired.com, the job marketplace for software engineers. If you accept a job through Hired, they will give you a $2,000 bonus. But as an extra bonus to our listeners, you can get an additional $2,000. That's $4,000 total if you sign up by going to softwareengineeringdaily.com and using the link on the right side of the page to sign up. Hired.com will set you up with 5 great companies for interviews. These are companies like Stripe, Facebook, Uber, companies you would actually want to work for, where you can go and learn the cutting edge of software engineering. Go to softwareengineeringdaily.com, click on the banner on the right, and try out Hired.com. Chris Chedeau is a core developer for React, the open source JavaScript library from Facebook, as well as the other tools and platforms that are surrounding the Facebook open source ecosystem. Chris, welcome back to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
On Software Engineering Daily, we had a week of shows about React and the other Facebook projects like GraphQL. And one question I kept thinking of was, with all these open source projects, what is the big picture of the future that Facebook is building towards?
So one of the big realizations when I've been working on React Native is that people, like I'm working on the React Native team, and for me, like React Native is just like the UI components and like the way you build React Native. But for developers that are switching from iOS or coming from web or Android, they don't see React Native as just this small thing. They see it as everything, like the way you build your entire application. So for them, like the IDE, the flow autocomplete, the type checking, the testing, like all of those are like together. And this is like one of the, like, this is React Native for them. And so given this, now what we want to do is to make sure like we take all of those pieces together and make them into like one coherent platform so that people can develop like much faster than they used to.
Do you see this platform looking something like the iOS ecosystem in the early days?
How so?
Well, just in the sense that it's kind of game-changing. I mean, in the sense that it's a suite of tools, it's a suite of platforms, and it seems like it really changes how developers would want to think about architecting their projects.
Yeah. So I think I wouldn't say game-changing because like it's way too early. Like there's not enough apps built with it to say that, but it's definitely like a big change in like how you build applications. So I really want to emphasize on the fact that React Native is still super early, and like we need your help like to build it. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So I mean, I think you kind of discussed this, but I mean, do you see these as like a loose set of tools or a concentrated platform, or is it kind of both?
Yeah. So when we started with React and open source at Facebook, we started as loose like tooling because like React like needed to be embedded inside of the Facebook world where like everything was like there was no single like libraries or abstraction inside of Facebook. But now with React Native, we have the chance to start from scratch. And so by starting from scratch, we can actually integrate like all of those together in a very robust way. But we also spent a lot of time trying to make sure you're not stuck in this world. So for example, if you're a JavaScript developer and you have like, and you want to install like some node modules that does what you want, like if it doesn't have a dependency on the DOM, then you're going to be able to inject it in your React Native project. Same if you already have existing or like someone wrote some iOS or Android components or like libraries or like something like this, we want to ensure that you can use it within React Native. So it started as loose coupling, and now we are like putting all of those together, and hopefully like in a year or two, like it's going to be a much better experience.
So we'll get into the more granular level a little further on, but to motivate this a little further, you sent me this really good talk that your colleague Nick Schrock gave at the At Scale conference, and he was sort of talking about the mobile revolution and how it changed things from the world prior to the mobile revolution. And he said that the mobile revolution has been a giant leap forward for consumers and a big step backwards for developers and product organizations. In what ways is mobile a step back for developer organizations?
So mobile is a big step back for, I think, three big reasons. So the first one is that it's much slower to build like one app like iOS or Android or mobile web than it was like to build like just a website. Because like the tooling is not like, you don't have live reload, even to recompile it takes a lot of time, and like the tooling is still like immature compared to like the dozens of years like we had on the web. So the second thing is the cross-platform aspect. So right now, like today, if you want to build a high-quality app, you need to do it on iOS or Android and on web. And so what this means is you've got like you need to staff 3 developers to do exactly the same thing. And this is not only increasing the cost by 3x, but even more, because you got like communication overhead, and then like there's a lot of subtle effects. So for example, one thing we realized is that because you're tasking the same, like you're tasking 3 people to do the same like job, and you can measure like what they do. So it puts a competition between those 3 people. And now they are trying to like be the best. Like the way the setup is, they want to be the best, and now they are going to do things not to like make the project better, like the company better, but to make sure they're better than the others. And so like there's those kinds of negative things that come with it. So this is like the first 2. And the third point is being able to deploy the app whenever we want. So with the Apple model, you've got to ask for Apple to review whatever you did and wait for them, then you're able to ship. Whereas on the web, like we were basically on our own, and like we could release like whenever we wanted. And so like all of those 3 combined make it a lot more expensive to build the same Facebook that we had like 5 years ago.
Yeah, and so I think one of those big problems that is maybe on a different from a different angle has a domain specific issue within Facebook is the Facebook app is really giant and it takes a long time to build, and so there's this problem at Facebook where if you want to develop a feature on the iOS app, like it takes a super long time to build it. So if you're like trying to write that feature and like test your code iteratively and stuff, every time you make a change traditionally to the iOS app, you would have to build, and that build process would take a really long time. Can you talk about how React Native alleviates that pain?
So the compilation model of iOS is that you need to build everything in order to like run your app. Whereas in the great thing about React Native, like it uses JavaScript, and so you can only load the JavaScript that you need on demand. And so this is like one of the big things we're trying to do right now is to reduce the time it takes to like load the app. And so what we want is to only load the components that are needed to render the first screen. And so unfortunately on like if you're on iOS or Android, you need to boot like everything, get everything into memory, and then you can like start working. And so this is like when you first load the app, but there's also one factor that's like not appreciated, which is the developer, like the end user, needs to download like this gigantic like bundle, like dozens of megabytes, like the first time they want to load, and every time they've got to update, they need to download like everything. And as you said, like in the Facebook app, there's a ton of things that are very useful for like some set of users. For example, like all our ads interface, like are really inside of the app are really useful for advertisers. But if you're not an advertiser, you're never going to like use it. So why should we send you all the bytes needed to make it run? So React Native, because we can send like JavaScript on demand and load JavaScript on demand, it gives us an advantage of we can actually more finely tune like what we load and what we don't.
Well, one thing I am interested in is like React Native has launched at this point for both iOS and Android.
Yeah.
And you have some interaction with both of these teams, significant interaction. How do these two React Native projects compare? And like, what are the difficulties in bridging the gaps between the two projects?
So one of the things that we decided like from like day one is we're going to share like all the JavaScript layer of React Native. And the clients have been designed to be like as thin as possible. So JavaScript is in charge, and so JavaScript are going to say like, oh, native do this, 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 and this. And so now it's up to the native implementation to actually implement those. And so the great thing with this is that you're able to write the same JavaScript, and it's going to like talk the same way, and it doesn't really know about like, oh, am I targeting iOS or am I targeting Android? And so on this base, like it gives us like more freedom. And now what's interesting is each platform has specific APIs and like performance optimizations. So for example, on iOS, if you're a web developer, you know that by default, all the views are overflow visible. So if you have a view and inside of the view, it extends outside of the container view, then you're going to be able to see it. And so this is also the way iOS is designed. But on Android, like the default is everything is clipped inside of the rectangle, of the container rectangle. And so now we've got to make like hard decision on like, what should we do? Because like if we change the default to 1, it's going to be like slower than the other. But at the same time, like you want to be able to control, and you don't want to be to have a different behavior. So for example, this one, like we don't know yet the answer. So right now they have 2 different behavior, which like is really killing me. But like those are the kind of things that we encounter when we like work on iOS or Android and web.
Yeah, is this like the tip of the iceberg? I mean, are you going to have? I imagine you're going to have even tougher decisions, and these are you probably are dealing with these kind of first ones right now, and probably you're thinking about the sort of principles that you're going to set forward.
Yeah. So actually, like the way we started the project was we wanted to implement. Like we went to talk to the iOS, web, and Android engineers, and we asked them like, what is the hardest thing you can do? Like you can do, and like this is very hard in iOS, Android. And so this was our first like test. We're going to implement them in React Native, like the early version that we had. And then we try to like make sure we see all of those like upfront, like as fast as possible. And so, and it actually worked pretty well because like since last year, like React Native has been started like 2 years ago. And in the first year, we like saw like basically all of the problems that we know today. So we haven't like realized something like groundbreaking like in the past year, and it's actually good because it shows that the system is actually robust, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the tagline of React Native is "Learn once, write anywhere." And what this means is that teams can share React components across platforms with a lot of code reuse, or code that looks very similar. So since we last talked, have there been any new projects at Facebook where this dream has been realized, and there's the iOS teams and the Android teams and the web teams are all working together in the way that you kind of imagined, where the pains and the cross-platform problems have been simplified?
Yeah. So for the product teams now, like all the teams that reach out to us saying, "Oh, I want to use React Native," like their first thing they say is, "If I'm building it on iOS, I'm also building it on Android at the same time." And this is very good because it reduces their amount of work by 2, and like this is good. But like we tested it on Ads Manager, and it's actually shipped on the iOS and Android. So all of those new teams are not shipped yet to the world, but like they're making good progress. But one thing that's interesting is more on the infrastructure side. We started sharing more and more code with the like Facebook ecosystem. So for example, like all the network layer, all the image caching, now we're starting to use more and more those abstractions that were in the native app and have been written, some of them have been written cross-platform. And so this is actually this is good because we have the opportunity to design an API that works on all of those. And because we've implemented the same thing on web, iOS, Android, some patterns emerged, some good practices and things like this. And so we've been able to, when we design those APIs, to incorporate all the learnings we've done, we've had from the past 5 years, so that the default behavior for users, for developers, is the one we know is going to scale.
Interesting. So one of the topics that I didn't get to discuss much during React Week is Nuclide, which is Facebook's IDE built on top of Atom.
Yep.
What was the initial motivation for Nuclide?
So the history of Nuclide is when I joined 3.5 years ago, there was no IDE or anything. You would SSH to a sandbox and use Emacs or VI or a virtual drive and start coding. But what we realized is that for writing PHP, sorry. But what we realized is that a lot of people don't really know how to configure Emacs and VI or all of this, and they were running it with really suboptimal setups. And so the first thing we did was to implement an IDE called FBIDE, and this was an IDE running on the web on your server machine. And it worked really well, but unfortunately, it didn't really scale, and there was many issues with the way it was written. And someone during a hackathon or something said "Oh, Atom sounds interesting. I'm going to start writing an IDE on top of this." And more Atom is really hackable and extensible, and so in a very short time span, he re-implemented all the features of FBIDE, and now we're all the people using FBIDE have switched to Nuclide.
Wow.
So this is for the internal story, and there's a lot of efforts going on to improve hack support, flow integration and all of this. So now for the open source part, this is one of the things where Nuclide was open source very, very early in the process. And right now it's in my opinion, it's not yet a good experience. The team has not been focused on open source as much because they've got so many things to work internally. But the way we see open source as Facebook is we want to continue investing in things. And so the first thing we release may not be the best, but then we 2 years down the road we're still going to invest in it and make it better every release.
So I thought Atom was just a text editor. I knew it was hackable, but I mean, I assume you've talked some to the GitHub teams who developed Atom. Was Atom originally conceived? Did they think it could become a full-fledged IDE?
I don't know the story behind this, but I'm pretty sure they did. Because when you think about it, an IDE is a text editor with some more features. And some of the features are you've got autocomplete, you've got the test results inline, you've got if you're if you're working on iOS, you've got your iOS simulator inline, all of this together. But really at the core of the IDE is the text editor plus all the integration with the language.
Does Nuclide do things that have not been done before, or does it just kind of do the same things in a much faster, better designed way?
I think one of the things that Nuclide really pioneered is being able for anyone working on the web to hack the editor and make it better. Because I remember I tried to modify, do a Visual Studio extension, it was pretty involved. And Nuclide, because it's all the web technology, you can go in and hack everything. So it's not revolutionary, because Sublime can do it in Python or whatever, but for the web community, I think like this is like one of the big advantage. And because it lets people extend it in like so many ways, we've been able to do like Facebook specific things like a lot inside of Nuclide.
Does Nuclide make React Native development significantly easier?
Yeah, I think like internally, like we've got like Flow autocomplete. Like this is like if you write your code using Flow and just like you can like run the test like within the IDE, you can like dot to autocomplete. You can like mouse over to see which variable is which type and things like this. But we want to add more things. So right now, like when you said like Nuclide is fast, like right now Atom and Nuclide is like slower than Sublime. So one of the focus of the team is make it like as fast as Sublime.
Do you still have to use XCode for iOS development?
So like one thing like I realized is that when I'm working on React Native as a product engineer, I don't use Xcode at all. Like React Native has been designed so that all the JavaScript can be run inside of, like can be written in like JavaScript. And the only time when you want to like write some Objective-C is when you want to add a custom extension or like write some like native bits. But this like Xcode actually does it like pretty well. Like, and like it's not worth investing like a lot of time and effort to like re-implement Xcode just for like 5 minutes, like the 5 minutes that we're going to use it like in your lifetime.
Interesting. One of the issues that I think about is like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that it's so easy to make web apps when it's not easy to make successful mobile apps. And maybe that sounds like kind of a naive phrase, but like if I think about the pace at which my bookmarks change at the top of my browser versus the pace at which my apps change on my home screen, I think the apps on my home screen change a lot less often than my bookmarks. Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot smaller universe of apps that I would be potentially changing. And actually, you retweeted an interesting Medium post recently that had like this chart of the frequency of downloads from the App Store. And it was like just this crazy like power law distribution where just like, the very, very small minority of apps had the vast majority of downloads. And there's not really a reason why that should be the case in the long term. There's no reason why mobile app development should be so hard. So anyway, well, let's talk about evangelism. The Facebook open source team was remarkably open to coming on Software Engineering Daily, just as you've come on right now. Does Facebook actively encourage teams to talk to the broader developer community, or is this just a natural outgrowth of the open source model?
Like I think the reason why open source at Facebook is so successful right now is because like the people working on it are like super passionate. Like they want to like talk about it and everything. And like I know when we open source React, like there was like a lot of like pressure from like the management saying like, yeah, we've tried this open source thing but it didn't really work, and like so we had to push back and like basically we had to do it ourselves. And now that it's working, like it's much easier for like you don't have to struggle that much to like go and talk somewhere. And we're also like encouraging, like we're organizing conferences like React Conf and F8 and like AdScale and all of those, so that we can like talk about all our open source thing and things. But one thing I think this is fundamentally different with open source is we've tried to go and talk like Facebook pushed us to talk like everywhere, like even since like before the really big open source push. But if you're talking about how Facebook does things in the abstract, like no one cares because like it feels like advertising. But if you open source something and talk about it, then like all the people like wants to talk to you and they invite you to talks and conferences and things like this. So I think by open sourcing like products, we have like more people that want to hear from us. And then like it's much easier to say, yeah, like you asked me to come, I say yes. Whereas like, like I'm going to submit a paper to this conference and get legal approval and management approval and things like this.
Yeah.
Which we have to do anyway.
So yeah, and I think like evidence of what you're saying. You told me that Facebook blog posts that are about open sourcing software have about 10x the number of views that a generic post has.
Yeah, no, this is crazy.
That's really interesting, and it kind of also suggests that the evangelism that you spend your time doing it's not like a distraction. It's like it's obviously it has value, especially going back to what you said at the beginning of this conversation, where you need the help from the open source community to get this stuff rolling. So you organized the React JS conference, and you've spoken at a bunch of events around this time. What are the challenges around organizing and speaking at these events and communicating with developers?
So, yeah, it was super interesting, like, to organize this event because, like, this is the first time I organized, like, any event. Like, the biggest thing I organized before was, like, parties at my house, like, when I was in college. But what's super interesting is, like, this is all about people. Like, all the speakers, like, you want to, like, have, like, intimate relationship to them to make sure, like, they're going to, like, feel like what they're doing is, like, relevant and, like, they're enjoyed coming here. And this is, like, one of the things I realized when I talk to conferences. So some of the conferences, like, I just talked there, and, like, I had no, like, contact with the conference organizer or anything, like, ever. And it feels like in the conference, like, it's not as warm, like, people don't talk to each other, like, it's a bit boring. Whereas, like, the events where, like, the organizer, like, reached out to me personally and, like, we had chat and, like, I could, like, throw questions and get answers, like, super quick. Like, those were, like, people were super passionate, like, both the speakers but also the attendees.
Interesting. Okay, well, so we got a bunch of listener questions, so I want to make sure we get to all of these. So I'm going to start asking you some of these. People tweeted these at me. I asked for questions, and if other people are listening to this and they don't know about my Twitter, it's at @software_daily. There's also a Slack channel if you have questions about speakers in the future. So the first question is from Mike Amize. And he says, React inline styles have a number of limitations. Other projects have been created to address these, notably Radium for pseudo classes and media queries. What does Facebook use internally to meet these needs, and how heavily does Facebook use inline styling?
Yeah. So the whole inline style like thing came from like my slides React CSS in JS. And the reason why I did those slides is because we are using inline style in React Native, and I didn't want it to be a controversy when we would release React Native. And because, like, if you remember the React announcement, like, everyone freaked out about JSX, and no one really, like, saw React. So I wanted, like, to get this out of the way so that, like, React Native is, like, doesn't have some drama around that. But what I did not expect is that so many people would, like, read it and, like, build things around it and, like, criticize it and everything. And, like, it's really sparked, like, a whole field of the front-end development, which is crazy. So now, in the context of Facebook, so in the first half of the slides, I explain CX and, like, all the problems, but I also explain what we use at Facebook. So, and as I mentioned, like, it gets us like 90% there. And so now inline styles can get us 100% there, but there are still, like, some issues to overcome, as you mentioned. And so doing, like, a very big push to change, like, the entire way we send styles on the web for, like, a 10% like improvement, like, it doesn't really make sense. Like, it's hard to sell the project.
Sure. Got it.
But there's been people inside of the company that, like, really tried. So for example, like, the Instagram team, when they rewrote their own thing, like, they used inline styles, and now the parse team is doing the same. And, like, and like they're trying to get like momentum, but like it's hard because like people are still stigmatized by this concept. And what you talked about Radium. So just one thing is that Jan Obermüller is working at Facebook and is a main contributor of Radium. So like this is like several people inside of the company are trying to push inline styles, but the biggest place where we use inline style is in like React Native because you cannot use CSS.
Okay, got it. So listener Paul Young posted a link to something called React Native for Web, and I didn't really get a chance to look at it other than that it was called React Native for Web. What is the purpose of that? Why wouldn't you just use normal React?
Okay, so this is when I started React Native, like everyone I talked to was like, you need the primitives to be like platform specific, otherwise like this is too crazy. Like with the cross-platform dream, like everyone like tried it, it doesn't work. But I was actually convinced that if you don't share the low-level building blocks, you cannot share anything. You cannot share any view code. And so I set out to find like the minimal set of abstractions that were needed to like build an app. And those came out to be view, text, and image. And so now my goal was to try to build as cross-platform as possible, but make sure that you can still build like anything you want. And what I quickly realized is that you only need those to build like 95% of your app. And so I made those so that they can be polyfilled on the web. So for example, like all the style attributes, like all the namings are the same on the web. And this gives us like a really good opportunity when times come where, let's say you have Ads Manager on iOS that you ported on Android, and now you want to port it on web. Then what you've just got to do is to re-implement view, text, image, and like the few native components that they're using, and now it just runs. And so now you'll need to like do some tricks to make it well on the browser, but this is the dream. Like you want to have one code base and share it everywhere. And so the reason why it isn't like officially supported or anything is because of prioritization. Like this is a non-trivial project to do, and like we had like so much other stuff to work on, but this is like something I'm very passionate about, and like when like we get more time and like less pressure, like I really want to actually make it real.
Sounds good. Listener Ben Peterson asks, do you use React on personal projects? If so, how do you use it?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I have a lot of personal projects, but they're all related to like React and React Native because like this is what I'm passionate about. So like one example I've did like recently is right now, as I told you, we're trying to improve the startup time. And so one thing I wanted to know is which like modules that you require are loaded at startup. And so I extracted this data as a big JSON blob, and then I built a small React interface, to be able to deep dive in the data, like move around and things like this to like understand the data more. And this is all built with React. One other thing I did was it's 2 years ago, but the React website, the React Native website is actually built using React and using server-side rendering, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so I haven't built like something meaningful for on my own time, but all the small prototypes I do every now and then, they're all using React. And I couldn't imagine going back to raw DOM manipulation
Do you take vacations and stuff and go and hack on random things, or I guess maybe that doesn't happen right now? You're so busy.
Yeah, so it just took 2 weeks. My sister was in town, and so I'm French, and I take all of my vacation days, all of them.
Oh.
So I'm not. Yeah, this is weird because a lot of people at Facebook they don't want to take vacations. They think they're more productive without it, but I don't know. But yeah, one of the stories that the CSS layout, the implementation of the layout I actually did it while I was on parental leave. And like while the baby was sleeping, like I would like just like build this thing, and it turns out that it actually like worked at the end, and like now it's powering React Native, so it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Jeff Winkler says, he asks for a CLI. So we have a request for a command line interface that gives some boilerplate, maybe something like Rails new.
Yeah, I really want this. Like ever since like we started React, like I knew this is what we needed to do, and I actually like spent a lot of time lobbying people inside of Facebook to open source like all of the projects that would be needed for that. So like Flow, Jest, Nuclide, Relay, and all of those, because like you cannot like it's hard to build a CLI without all the tools that comes with it. But now the tricky part about the CLI is like we are not going to use it internally at Facebook. And so this is one of those things where it's super hard to prioritize because we're not using it internally at Facebook, so we're not going to spend time like building it just for open source. And like when we get bug reports or like pull requests or things like this, because we're not using it, like we won't know how to prioritize and things like this. And so like many people internally try to do it, but like none of those like really took off. And so actually what I'm more excited about is on the React Native side, because we control the entire environment. So now the getting started with React Native is React Native npm install -g React Native CLI, React Native init. And then you just open the XCode project, press play, and it's working.
Oh, that's awesome. What's the boilerplate project it gives you?
Give you a plate with like Babel and Jest and like Flow and like a few things like this, and iOS and Android.
Is it like a to-do app or something?
Oh no, this is like just a white app, like blank app with just a text in the middle.
Oh, awesome.
But you can get like, and there's just an index.ios.js, index.android.js, and like now you can start hacking.
Sure. Very cool. Chris Gehrman asks, what are React's strongest and weakest attributes? And I'm going to put a twist on that and ask if you can talk about the more subtle strengths and weaknesses that we haven't discussed. Over the course of all our episodes, we've talked about a lot of the big strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. So I think like one of the like weakness for us, like on the like React Native and things like this, is what I just mentioned, which is that like if we're not using it internally, like for example inline styles or like the CLI or something like this, then like we're not going to invest time like building it, even though it's like super useful for the community, like for open source. And like I don't have a silver bullet for this. One thing that we've done is to give commit access to like a few people, but like there always seems to be blocked on us reviewing things. So like on the open source side of things, I think like this is our like weakest point right now. Now on React itself, I don't know.
It's a pretty broad question.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's fine.
Maybe I'll think about this sometime. Yeah.
So CX Fang 1, who by the way works at Alibaba, which is kind of cool. And if he's listening, and if there's anybody from Alibaba that wants to come on the show, that would be a really interesting show, I'm sure. So CX Fang 1 asks, why not use React Native in the Facebook main app?
So we're actually using it. So if you look at the Pokes dashboard, this is using React Native. So, and now we have like several projects going on to like integrate into the main app. So one of the difficulties so far has been that like the main app, because like there's everything like lumped together in it, like has some really hard constraints on like memory, CPU, like time to start and everything like this. And this is also critical for the business. So like for the standalone apps, like because we just have React Native, like we can pay the cost of like the React Native SDK. But now for the main app, you got to pay the cost of both the iOS SDK and like all those things running and the React Native SDK. And so this cost like right now is like a bit too high for people to just randomly like ship features. And we're working like super hard on perf for this. But I'm really confident that in a month or two, like we'll have like most of this resolved and like we'll be able to ship a lot more things. And then the second thing is Usually, like for new products to come in, like you don't rewrite something that already exists. Like you build new products, and those products not only they have to like test out the React Native SDK and things like this, but they also have to test out their own product. And so like they're doing a lot of like A/B testing and like making sure the metrics are good and things like this. And this is a fact of life. Like this takes time. And so we're waiting for them to like get their product right before they can ship. But like we are like fully committed to like we have had like a few, I would say like a dozen, like 10 teams. I don't know the exact number, but around 10 teams like actively working on React Native like to integrate in the main app right now.
Okay, so that's the end of the listener questions. I have some kind of larger scope questions about Facebook development in the whole and how that applies to your work and how you think about things. One of the things that I found interesting about my conversations with Nick was just talking about how GraphQL fits into the low bandwidth type of development. And, you know, Facebook is in this really interesting spot where it's kind of becoming this public utility that, you know, it's clearly of high value to people in developing countries. And, you know, the internet.org initiative is really interesting. It has, and, you know, people are just relying on Facebook increasingly as a utility. So I'm curious how you think about this low bandwidth stuff. And I know Facebook has like a daily or a week, or is it like a weekly thing where like everybody has to go on low bandwidth or something, or a monthly thing? Yeah. So yeah, I'm just curious about how this low bandwidth development stuff affects your work and your thinking.
Yeah. So like Facebook is really good at optimizing one thing. So like there's like every 6 months there's a big all hands, and like Mark Zuckerberg is going to say like, okay, these 6 months we're going to focus on on the memory usage, on the startup time, or like 2G and things like this. And then like all the teams are like empowered to like do whatever they need to like achieve like this one objective, while making sure like all the other metrics are like don't tank or whatever. And so like right now it's 2G because like this is a super important like medium, and like we are investing like you can get a 2G phone like with all the the performance testing is running on the real like shitty phones with 2G. So like I would say like on me personally, like it changes like what are my objectives like for the project. So before it was like integrating to the main app, and now like it's more like, okay, I need to integrate in the main app, but I also need to be like super good on like bandwidth. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any interesting anecdotes for how that's changed course for certain projects or within React?
Oh yeah. So like the biggest thing is that like every year or two, like Facebook like implements something called FB Lite, which is like, okay, we have like way too much like crap inside of the Facebook main app. Like, can we start like again from scratch and like ship it? And like all of those projects are super interesting because like the requirements are like you want to be able to deliver like as good of an experience with like super limited constraint. And like right now, like we've got this thing which is like we try to load React Native in less than 1 second. Less than 2 seconds on a shitty phone and a shitty network. And like this makes us rethink a lot of the assumptions. For example, you like with this kind of critical deadline, you can't require anything you don't use in the critical path. Otherwise, like it's just too slow. You cannot download anything you don't need. And you've got to batch like every single request so that you can like fetch everything at once. And so one of the great examples, which is more public, is the Chrome team. They do a lot of talks around like how to get 1 second on mobile. And so this is those kind of efforts that are like going on, and they make you rethink a lot of the architecture.
When you design technology for these low bandwidth environments. Does that tend to help the technology that you're building for the high bandwidth individuals, like just people in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, because like this is one of the interesting thing is if you give someone like a shitty laptop, he's going to like write a website that are way more optimized and that they are going to be like faster even for like higher end like desktop. Like we learned that. And so yeah, this is something that actually works. Like if you design with all of those crazy constraints, like this product is going to be like over constrained, like for sure. But all the learnings you get from this, then you're going to be able to move them to like the main app and build like infra that make sure you don't overfetch and in a scalable way. So for example, like Relay came from this experiment where like they wanted to rebuild the like mobile, like the tablet websites on the web. And they were like, okay, we need like to have less than 1 second. So how do we do that? And they realized that, okay, we need to fetch everything at once. And how do you do that? Then we need to have like all the queries being statically analyzable. So how do you do that? Now you got to integrate with GraphQL and all of this like trickle down together.
It reminds me of hearing stories about people being punch card developers where they would write all their code on punch cards and they would get it exactly right the first time.
Yep.
It's kind of the constraints.
Yeah.
Is the mother of invention.
Yeah, this is also a trade-off because like if you like require everyone to use punch card, like okay, sure, your site is going to be fast, but like you're going to have like 0 features. And so one of the stance we use at Facebook is we let product developers do whatever they want, make it like, and they're going to try to get their metrics and whatever. But as an infra team, we're going to build abstractions so that product developer using those abstractions like cannot fuck it up. Like if they use the abstraction like the way it was built, like by default is going to have all of those learnings. And so yeah, this is one of the also interesting thing about like the way we do open source is on open source, like the product that starts on open source, like they grow from nothing to something. But at Facebook, like we grow from nothing to something, a lot of things. And the one that work, like now we open source and we continue growing. So
do people in developing countries use Facebook in ways that are starkly different than how we use them in the US?
Yeah. So yeah, one of the anecdotes is that like many people, what they do is they take their phone during the morning and try to load up as many stories as possible because they're on Wi-Fi at home and it's free. And then like the entire day, like they remove like all connectivity and then use Facebook like offline. And so like this is a use case that like we didn't think about. And now we're like making progress to make sure it works, but like, yeah, these kind of things.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I mean, I can relate to that because like sometimes going on an airplane, if I don't want to pay for Wi-Fi, I open up a ton of tabs that I'm going to read while I'm on the plane. But like with Facebook, that wouldn't work at all. I mean, it would be a lot different. That's super interesting. So I'm not sure if you have any insight into this next question, but machine learning is a really big focus at Facebook and all the other big tech companies. It seems like kind of like a core idea that people are racing on. So is this discussion totally orthogonal to building front-end technologies, or are there any machine learning considerations that come into account when you're building the React ecosystem?
Yeah. So it's interesting because like my first project at Facebook was like we have bootcamp, which is like 1 month and a half where we like we are not assigned to any product or project or team or whatever, and we pick up tasks that are like that sounds interesting and like work on them. And one of those tasks was Pete Hunt said that like the task was one line saying like, oh, we've got all of those facial recognition, like facial detection data, and it would be nice to use it to improve like the tagging experience. So I said, yeah, it sounds cool. And so on the photo viewer now, when you press like tag, it shows like squares where like all the faces we detected. And so this thing is like improved the like whole user experience for Facebook because now people are tagging more persons. Like people are being tagged more often, and so they get more notifications. They come more often. They comment, and like there's a lot of interaction going on, and so all of this uh, product, like it improved the product, but the core technology is actually machine learning. Like how do you detect faces? And so what we realized is that the more sophisticated we go with those machine learning techniques, the better the product is. And so this is a dynamic that is only like very recent, because until like a few years ago, like sure we could like infer a lot of things with machine learning, but we had no idea how to use it to make the product better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually watched a talk from Jeff Dean recently where he was saying that one of the interesting things about neural nets is that the more it's almost like the more engineering that goes into them, the more data that goes into them, the better the results are. And maybe that sounds like something that's obvious, but like to anybody that's worked at a large company and seen how products scale and like as they get more bloated, it actually gets harder to work on them. This is actually like kind of a counterintuitive thing.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that like the second thing is true that you said. Like the more features you have, the more bloated it is. Like the worse it is.
Oh, okay.
So for example, like all the time, like there's product teams that try to re-implement a simplified version of some feature. So for example, like when I started, we tried to re-implement like a lean version of the photos part of your profile. And so we were like, oh my god, like this is like we are displaying like more photos, like it looks better, like it feels better, it's more performant and everything. And then we like did an A/B test, and like all the metrics were down. And so we were like, well, why is this? And then we realized that there was actually a like button at the top right, like an ugly like button at the top right of the album. And by adding this back, then like a lot more people liked the album, and therefore like engagement was up, and like the virtual cycle went up. So, and like we've seen this like so many times during this product that in the end, like we had to put back all of those features because those are features that people actually use. And so if you're trying to make a leaner version, like they don't use Facebook as much, and like they don't get enough value for this.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, I guess that makes sense. I mean, there's kind of a difference between leanness in UI and leanness in like how the infrastructure or the back end works. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. So when you're like thinking about machine learning products, and again, this is maybe going down the rabbit hole that you're not familiar with, but do you know how much the phone's processor takes part in the machine learning feedback loop? Because so many of Facebook users are on mobile. Is Facebook leveraging that fact in the feedback loop, or does everything happen server side?
So I don't know, I don't know today like what's being done, but I know that there are experiments to try to make reduced models to do face detection on the phone, for example. But like I've left the photos team like 2.5 years ago, and like I'm not sure at this point like what's being done. But yeah, like this is like something like in the like grand scheme of things, like Facebook on the web was like really pushed by the server, and like we tried to make it in a like single page app, but like it's not really. Now if you look at the iOS or Android like developments, like they're really like single page app. Like the client is storing like all the data, is caching things, like this is the client driving things. And so we're seeing it more and more, like I'm sure like machine learning models like are going to go in that direction, having more thing on the client.
Are we wasting a lot of processor cycles on our phones?
Surely, I don't know.
Okay. Right. Super broad question. We did a show about Elm, and I've heard a lot of comparisons about Elm and React. Have you looked at Elm?
Yeah, I've looked at Elm. So I actually looked at Elm, ClojureScript, and all of those. And those, like, I'm super interested in those because, like, this is like the FB Lite example where they take like all of those crazy constraints and they try to come up like with a unified theory around all of those. And this is like very good to like find out like new patterns that can be useful. But what I found out in practice is that by being pure in this sense that you don't accept any other constraint, then you limit yourself because like some things that were easy before are like super hard. And like for example, like Haskell, like there's a huge community of people like loving Haskell and building small things, but like there's not a lot of people like writing like big things with Haskell. And so, but there's a lot of things to learn from Haskell, like the type theory, like functional thing that we try to embed in React. So the way I want React to move forward on React Native and all of those is to take, like to let them like do the hard work of pioneering like all of those techniques and then bring it back to JavaScript, like change JavaScript, adding types to JavaScript and etc. So that we get like a middle ground between like untyped JavaScript that like really sucks and like fully typed Elm that like is good for what it does, but like if you want to escape from this, like you're stuck. And Redux is a good example of like taking Elm architecture and like porting it to JavaScript.
Yeah, and I heard you guys just hired Dan Abramov.
Yeah.
That's great. So, I mean, can you talk any more about Redux? Like, are you thinking of like how you reframe development at Facebook using Redux, or like how does that play into your thinking?
So, like the great thing about Flux architecture is that it's very vague, and like so we have like implementation of Flux internally, like it's many different teams that have many different implementations, but like when a new project is started, like they get to choose whatever they want, and like many people are starting to use Redux on their new products. So this is like how you organically grow. And I don't know, like if Redux is successful, like probably like in 6 months or a year or 2 years, we're going to say like, okay, all of those things that were written pre-Redux, we're going to convert it to Redux or something like this. But then like, if those experiments are not successful at scale, then we're going to say like, okay, well, this was a failed experiment and we're going to like try something else.
Sure. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure talking to you as always. It's just been really interesting, and I'm still a huge fan of React. And yeah, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasant hour.
Yes, definitely.